Hi, everybody. Welcome back to week 5, part 5 of our Parenting Today lecture series here at the University of Maryland, University College. We're continuing our discussion by talking about transgendered identity, and we're going to start off with some terms here to help guide our conversation. So transgender or cross-gender is a term that describes any reversal in gender roles. Transsexual is a term used when the biological sex of an individual is inconsistent with gender identification. This that may or may not lead to sexual reassignment surgery. A transvestite or cross-dresser is someone who dresses in the clothes of the opposite gender. It's also important to note that people that are transvestite or cross-dressers are usually heterosexual according to current research. Gender identity disorder is when the identification with the other gender leads to unhappiness or personal turmoil, and it's also important to note that it's not the same as homosexuality. So that fact is really important. You want to put a circle or a star around this particular slide because you're going to see these terms again on your quiz. Next slide here, an important fact that we want to keep in mind is the risk of abuse rises for kids who don't conform to gender roles during childhood. So 1 in 10 kids display gender nonconformity before the age of 11, and on average, these children are more likely to experience physical, psychological, and sexual abuse and suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder by early adulthood. So this is cited from a study of nearly 9,000 young adults that was published online today in Pediatrics. So when talking about gender identity, girls in particular need parental support. So in mainstream United States society, research tells us that girls are really raised to be concerned and sometimes overly concerned about the needs and thoughts of others. So parents can challenge girls to find a sense of purpose and identity and encourage them to be less others focused and more focused on their own needs. So boys in mainstream American society today are really raised to be strong, daring, and powerful. Boys are often chastised for showing emotion, which can create emotional distance from parents. So parents can be a counterbalance by showing boys that they are valued even when they are vulnerable and showing emotion. And talking about ethnic identity development, it seems to take precedence over gender identity development as we look at the research. We're going to spend some time today looking at the research of Dr. Jean Finney, who developed a stage model of adolescence ethnic identity development based on the work of Erik Erikson and Dr. Marcia. And what we do know is that discrimination can have a lifelong impact on self-esteem, anger, and depression, and can also prolong the identity formation stage. It's also important to note that supportive parenting can counteract some of the effects of discrimination. So here's a picture here of Dr. Finney, and we're going to just flesh out and discuss her model of ethnic identity development. One of the stages being unexamined ethnic identity, which is defined as a lack of exploration or curiosity related to ethnic identity, and these children can experience diffusion or foreclosure. Dr. Finney also gave us the ethnic identity search or moratorium, which is defined as an encounter and exploration of ethnic identity, and it's often triggered by an unpleasant event, such as being a victim of discrimination or oppression. Dr. Finney talked about ethnic identity achievement, which is defined as a successful development of a bicultural identity. So continuing our discussion about the level of ethnic identity, when we talk about blended biculture, that is a positive identification with both the mainstream and ethnic culture. Alternating biculture is primary identification with an ethnic group, but identification with the mainstream group while in school or other public places. A separated identity is defined as no identification with the mainstream culture, and is really the hallmark is feeling rejected and devalued. So there's no difference here in levels of self-concept, academic performance, or negative emotion. Talking about ethnic identity, parents really must be teachers and models of ethnic identity and pride. We do know that discrimination can definitely be a concern for children. Parents need to teach children about obstacles that may be faced by an ethnic or racial group, and also share coping skills so that children have the skills that they need when they deal with discrimination out in the world. So parental support and neighborhoods with strong ethnic pride can also help teens develop a strong ethnic identity. So we talk about the U.S. impact on ethnic families. Research tells us that children of immigrants tend to adopt European American values, and with each successive generation, beliefs and values tend to become more European American. Teens worry less about compensating for ethnic differences. An example of that is that research that tells us that achievement in Asian Americans drops with each successive generation in the United States. And this can create parent-teen conflict across ethnic groups. Switching our focus now, talking about relationships and peer relationships in particular, friendships tend to be formed with other teens around similar interests. So teens with friends tend to have better social skills, higher confidence, and better academic success. So we do know that the internet and social media offer new venues for peer interactions. It tends to make existing friendships closer, and interactions with strangers do not usually become close. However, it's really important to note and to teach children and teens about internet safety and the dangers about interacting with people that you do and you don't know online. In early adolescence, kids tend to be in same-sex groups of about 5 to 9 individuals. Girls tend to spend a lot of time talking, whether that's through actual talking on the phone or texting, talking through a webcam, Skype type of a format. Boys tend to spend a lot of time in contact sports that promote exploration, learning, and social skills development. And shifting our focus now to mid to late adolescence, that's typically when dating begins. And this dating is usually very intense and short-lived in the beginning and creates some distance between parents and teens, especially if the teen is sexually active. Talking about problems in peer relationships, we know that peers can convince others to engage in deviant behaviors. You definitely want to put a circle or a star around the definition of co-rumination, which is defined as collective dwelling on depressive symptoms. So for girls, co-rumination tends to predict depression and anxiety, and for boys, co-rumination does not predict feelings. So, an example of co-rumination would be a group of girls that are friends saying like, oh, I'm so depressed, I look so fat today, and that tendency to repeat that sentiment or over and over again. Social factors that impact emotional identity and development definitely demand our perusal and further investigation here. So in terms of the electronic media and the role of electronic media in the lives of teens, how much time are children spending on electronic media today? We do know that oftentimes in these particular studies that it is underreported. Both children and adults, people do have a tendency to underreport the amount of time that they're spending either on electronic or social media. So between the ages of birth to 2, it's typically spending 1 hour a day. Between the ages of 2 to 8, 2 hours a day spent on social media. And then we see a big jump here between the ages of 8 to 18, spending 6.5 hours a day on electronic media. So in terms of the type of media, younger children are mostly watching television, whether that's on cable or whether it's on a smart TV or watching videos on the internet, Netflix, things like that. Older children are typically mostly viewing things on the computer as well as listening to music. There are demographic differences in media usage. In terms of gender, video games are typically played by 80% of boys and 20% of girls. When we talk about music, statistically girls listen to more music than boys. In terms of racial differences, African American children watch more television and video games than other race groups. terms of socioeconomic status, children in high socioeconomic status groups tend to read more, use the computer more, and watch television less. There's a parental view when it comes to electronic media. This electronic media can be used to occupy children, can be used to find time for housework and time alone for parents. It can also be used to calm children down. Parents overall have a negative review of video games when they're being asked. Parents tend to say that television can be good for information, but it's bad for negative behaviors, especially programs that have excessive use of violence or portrayals of sex. Now, there's good news about electronic media. It can help children develop better hand-eye coordination. Increased television watching is also associated with a later age of sexual initiation, and it can be a good source of information. The bad news about media is it tends to be associated with attention problems, sleep problems, a higher BMI, remember that's an acronym for body mass index, decreased activity levels, less reading, up to 30% less time on homework, up to 34% less, academic problems, especially if children has a television in their bedroom, and less interaction with parents, family, and friends. So this explains 10% of variance in child aggression, contributes to an aggressiveness later on in adulthood. So we're going to end part 5 of our lecture series today. I look forward to rejoining you when we commence our next video, part 6.